My name is Nick Mirzoeff. In January 2012, I was asked to write an essay for Public Culture about my occupation at Occupy Wall Street. It was published as Why I Occupy in September of 2012. This is the essay, Why I Occupy. I live in New York City, where I teach at New York University, and since October 2011, the centerpiece of my intellectual and political life has been Occupy Wall Street. I don't claim to have been there since the beginning, whenever that was, or to be a leader, whatever that means, or still less to speak for the movement. For better or worse, this has nonetheless been a signature moment in my personal, professional, and political life. It's only been 5 months since the first people started to occupy in New York. It has been a year since the Tunisian revolution suddenly changed the sense of the possible, and then Egypt made it go viral. The moment seems ancient and modern at once. Vladimir Lenin famously danced in the snow when the Bolshevik Revolution had lasted longer than the Paris Commune. If the encampment at Liberty Plaza did not quite outlast the Commune, Occupy continues, and there's dancing most days for those so inclined. I've been waiting for this sense of possibility for a long time now. It was Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister, who coined neoliberalism's mantra, "There is no alternative." In 1979, on the day she was first elected, I went to a performance of Macbeth, the famous one, with Ian McKellen and Judi Dench at the Don Mile Warehouse in London. I remember wondering as I walked out of Shakespeare's examination of the disastrous consequences of autocratic ambition, how long this conservative moment might last. I was too young to vote then. It's only now, as I turn 50, that I see a chance, just a chance, that we might take a different direction. In the space that's opened up between the disappointment engendered by Obama and the emergence of Occupy has come a widespread realization that no election of a single candidate or party is likely to change the neoliberal consensus, let alone transform capitalism. Hard on the heels of this commonplace, in certain left circles at least, came the opportunity and the responsibility to try and do something about it. I want to be able to think that, even if Occupy evaporates, I did at least participate as best I could. The commitment is a little less monastic than traditional activism. One of the strengths of the Occupy movement is the rhetoric of step up, step back, meaning that once you've done something or said something, you should in fact step back for a while and let others act or speak. As much as some people have given over their lives to the project, this formula allows others a variety of ways to engage. On days of direct action, for example, there are actions planned where there is a risk of getting arrested, such as a picket of Wall Street, and others where that risk is low, like a march to City Hall. The movement needs the visibility of both disruptive non-violent direct action and numbers in the streets, so one choice is not more important than the other. Of course, it's now widely reported in the mainstream media that Occupy is over, because most of the encampments have been evicted. In the week in which this little essay was written, at the end of January 2012, there was a major action in Oakland, California, where police overreaction prompted solidarity marches in 27 American cities, including New York. Protesters staged an Occupy Davos at the meeting of the world's wealthiest people. And the Belgian city of Brussels went on general strike to protest the European Union austerity measures. All this less than a week after hundreds of thousands refilled Tahrir Square in Cairo to reclaim their revolution. So it's not over. Not least because the crisis in global capitalism is so palpably not over. There's no point in denying that the eviction was a loss. But in some senses it was also a gain. The encampment taught us, amongst many other things, how many people there are with unmet needs in American cities. Needs ranging from food and shelter to dependencies of all kinds. And we saw those people performing non-normative bodies and mentalities. A volunteer assembly is not capable of meeting those needs, and there was a danger that it might have been overwhelmed by them. At the same time, this encounter reminds us that the 99% is composed not of Ayn Rand-like market-driven machines, but of highly diverse bodies that think, whose embodiment and ways of thinking are on extended spectra. It's not surprising that away from the media obsession with violence, many disability activists have been closely involved with Occupy, and it's perhaps the first political movement of note to include ableism in its list of targets. What's perhaps most interesting in the long run about Occupy is precisely this ability to bring together issues that had long been considered separate in the same frame. Separation has been a key tactic of neoliberal governance, exemplified in the walls that have been built in Israel-Palestine, on the United States-Mexico border, in Baghdad, around the Spanish colonies in North Africa, and of course around countless gated communities. The conceptual refusal to separate is also a practical tool of organizing. At present, at the time of writing that is, activists in New York and elsewhere are preparing for a global day of action on May Day, May the 1st. Although May Day is a festival of labor in many countries, it was not observed in the United States for a long time. There have actually been 2 different May Day events in New York for the past several years, drawing on different constituencies in immigrant communities and organized labor. While there was a rapprochement between the events last year, with the Union Square activists of the May Day Coalition marching down to Foley Square to meet the labor union rally, Occupy has provided the frame in which both can organize together, using the slogan, legalize, unionize, organize. Nick Mirzoeff and Natalie Fenton, professors of media and communication at Goldsmiths College, University of London, have argued that this potential for generalization amounts to a reconceptualization of democracy in the context of both the financialization of everything and the crisis of Western democracy. In company with London-based Occupy theorist David Graeber, they argue that markets are a modern invention and have become predicated as natural, producing so-called democracy as their natural outcome. Yet there is a palpable gap between the promise of democracy's voice and what it can now offer its citizens. They write, "We have grown used to living in democracies that aren't working, that is, don't work as democracies." While their argument is centered in the United Kingdom, it clearly applies very well to the United States, where Barack Obama's election in 2008 seemed at first to reinvigorate the possibilities of representative democracy and has now come to represent the very weakness of its operations. Many Occupy activists were inspired first by the idea of fundamental change in 2008, and perhaps so too in 1997 in the United Kingdom with the first Labour victory. What is now, as Mirzoeff and Fenton put it, so striking about the Occupy movement is that it is a peaceful, collective attempt to face up to that unwelcome post-democratic truth and to explore new ways of experiencing the general will. It's symbolic of the changed times that Chicago, site of what seemed to be a transformatory celebration at the election of Obama in November 2008, is now set as a target for mass occupation during the G8 and NATO meetings set for May 2012. Mayor Rahm Emanuel, executor of many of Obama's least effective policies, has preemptively passed extraordinary measures, limiting the possibility of protest in the city and expanding his authority to use force. Nonetheless, the G8 immediately decided to retreat to the safety of Camp David, rather than risk an encounter with those they claim to represent. For a thinker like Jacques Rancière, there would be no contradiction here. Rather than call this post-democracy, Rancière has argued instead that the platonic hatred of democracy has always continued to apply to Western society. That is to say, then, in the fashion of Bruno Latour, we have never been democratic. It's hard to argue with this when we see Greece, home of the purported Western tradition of which so much was made during the culture wars of the 1990s, forced to depose its own prime minister rather than have a referendum on the imposition of extreme austerity. As I then wrote, even this technocracy was insufficient for the European Union, which wished to impose an economic commissioner on the country for fear that the sclerotic ruin of representative democracy, that is the Greek Parliament, might nonetheless have refused some of the bond market's demands. That's the essay from 2012. I'm speaking to you now in 2013, in November. Things are very different. What was the Occupy movement has perhaps dispersed into what we call a movement of movements, people working in smaller groups, autonomously, struggling to try and make change. But in Turkey, at Gezi, and in Sao Paulo, and elsewhere, we've been reminded of the force of mass occupation of bodies in public space. And we see the impulse of the movement circulating around the globe, returning to different spaces. It's still not over.